2 days after my mother's funeral, my husband handed me divorce papers, and he was still smiling. My name is Shanice Harrison, and I'm about to tell you how the man I loved for 10 years showed me his true face on the worst day of my life. It all began 2 days after we buried my mother. Just 2 days. To understand how I ended up at that moment, you need to understand our marriage. When I was 17, my father died, and my mother, Gloria Patterson, became my entire world. The woman who raised me alone after my father passed, who worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make sure I never felt the lack of what we didn't have, who put me through college on a secretary's salary and sheer grit, who stood beside me on my wedding day, held my hand, and smiled, even though there was something in her eyes that told me she still had doubts about Derek. I should have listened to that look, but I was 23 and in love, and Derek was charming, handsome, and said all the things a young woman wants to hear. I convinced myself we were happy, that we were building something solid together. The first time I noticed Derek changing was about 5 years into our marriage, though at the time I didn't recognize it as a change. Just stress, ambition, just normal married life. He started talking about money differently than before, tinged with resentment instead of hope. "Your mom should have bought more houses when prices were cheap," he would say as we drove past neighborhoods we couldn't afford. "By now, she could have owned a fortune. Teaching doesn't pay," he complained every time I came home from my job at the elementary school, tired but fulfilled. "You're wasting your time with those kids when you could be doing something that actually creates wealth." "We deserve more than this," he kept repeating. More than our modest home, our reliable cars, our comfortable but not extravagant life. I thought he was just stressed from his sales job, from commission-based income that rose and fell with orders. I thought if I loved him more, supported him more, things would settle down. But they didn't get better. The obsession with money only grew worse, especially after my mother was diagnosed 3 months before she died. "Your mom must have savings," he said when I told him about the cancer. Not "how is she" or "what does she need?" I moved into my mother's house to take care of her, and Derek complained about it constantly. "You're neglecting me," he said over the phone every time I called to check in. "You're choosing her over our marriage." As if caring for the woman who was dying, the woman who gave birth to me, were a choice between her and him, instead of an act of love and basic duty. Looking back now, I can see how carefully he staged everything, making sure all our friends knew how hard he had it, how much he was sacrificing, how supportive he was despite being under such pressure. It was all performance. It was all calculation. On the morning my mother died, I was holding her hand, whispering that I loved her, watching her take her final breath, weak and then gone. My best friend Tiana was there too, along with Pastor Evans from our church. Derek was at work. He said he couldn't take another day off, that he had already missed too much. The funeral was beautiful in the way funerals for someone truly loved tend to be. The church was packed. The choir sang hymns my mother adored, and one by one, people stood up to share stories about the kindness, wisdom, and quiet generosity of Gloria Patterson. I cried through the entire service while Derek sat beside me, visibly uncomfortable, checking his phone whenever he thought no one was watching. The next day, the papers were delivered by a courier, his face apologetic as he handed them to me. I signed for them with shaking hands and read the unfamiliar legal terms: divorce, irreconcilable differences, equitable division of assets. For a moment, the words seemed to float. They hovered in the air as if from another language, something I couldn't fully process. I had just spent the morning at my mother's house, going through her closet, touching dresses that still faintly smelled of her perfume, and sobbing so hard I had to sit down on the floor because my tears blurred everything. That afternoon, Derek came over. letting himself in with his key as if he were still the owner of the place. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by sympathy cards and casseroles sent by church members, still in my pajamas, because I didn't have the strength to change my clothes. "Have you gone through the papers yet?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. "You filed for divorce 2 days after my mother's funeral," I said, my voice flat. "Shanice, I know the timing isn't ideal." "Ideal?" I let out a short, hollow laugh, with no humor in it. "My mother just died, Derek. She's gone. And you're talking about timing?" He actually had the nerve to look offended. "You can't turn this into your personal grief. This has been building for a long time. We both know this marriage has been dead for years." "Dead for years?" I stood up, bracing my hands on the table. "I was taking care of my dying mother, not because the marriage was falling apart, but because I was doing what needed to be done while you complained that I wasn't home enough." "Either way," he said, pulling out a folder and setting it carefully on the table, "we need to talk about assets. My lawyer says that in Texas, inheritances received during a marriage are marital property. Your mother's estate will need to be split evenly between us." And just like that, the truth was out. The real reason for the divorce, the calculation that had been hiding behind those cold eyes. "You're divorcing me for my mother's money?" I said bluntly, without a shred of doubt. "I'm divorcing you because our marriage is over." He shifted his weight, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, but calculation, as if he'd rehearsed this moment and was making sure he hit all the right marks. "I'm talking about the fact that your mother left a significant estate, and as her son-in-law, I'm entitled to half. But honestly, Shanice, I've been thinking about this for a while. We've grown apart. For the last 4 months, you've neglected our marriage to take care of her. I think we both deserve better." The cruelty of it knocked the breath out of me. He slid the folder toward me. "My lawyer estimates your mother's assets at around $1.7 million. That's $850,000 each, plus an equal split of the value of this house. I think that's fair." Fair. I stared at the man I'd shared a bed with for 10 years, the man who was supposed to love me through joy and grief alike. "Derek, my mother just died. We buried her this morning. What are you even talking about?" "Get out," I said quietly. "This is my house, too." "Get out," I shouted this time, my voice shaking with grief and rage. "Get out of my sight." He stood slowly, jaw clenched. "You should know I've already talked to a lawyer about the inheritance. The longer you drag this out, the messier it gets. Just sign the papers, Shanice. Let's both move on with our lives." "Get out," I said again. He left, grabbing his keys and wallet in a hurry, his face almost relieved, while I collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing so hard it felt like my ribs were going to crack. My mother had been right. 2 weeks before she died, when the morphine haze lifted for a brief moment and her eyes grew sharp and knowing. "Promise me you'll trust attorney Bernard Jackson," she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "When the time comes, listen to him. Do you hear me?" I had promised, thinking she was just worried about me, maybe a little paranoid from the medication. Now, sitting alone in the living room while my husband pushed for divorce on the very day of my mother's burial. I wondered if my mother had known something I didn't. I picked up the phone and called attorney Bernard Jackson's office, my voice shaking when the receptionist answered. "This is Shanice Harrison. My mother is Gloria Patterson. I need to speak with Mr. Jackson about her estate." "Of course, Ms. Harrison. He's been expecting your call. Can you come in at 10 o'clock tomorrow?" That surprised me. How did he expect me? How did he know I would call? Bernard Jackson's law office was in a downtown office building, and I had met him a few times over the years, whenever my mother needed legal help. He was a dignified black man in his late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind metal-rimmed glasses. The next morning, when I walked in, still wearing the black dress I'd worn to the funeral, because everything else felt wrong, he stood up and pulled me into a hug. "Shanice, I'm so sorry about Gloria. Your mother was an extraordinary woman." "Thank you," I managed, my throat tightening. He motioned for me to sit, and I noticed several thick folders already laid out on his desk, as if he had prepared for this meeting. "I know you're going through an incredibly difficult time, so I'll be direct. Your mother came to see me 6 months ago to make some very specific changes to her estate plan." 6 months ago? But she wasn't even sick then. "That's true, but Gloria was always a woman who planned ahead." He opened the top folder. "Now, before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Has Derek mentioned the inheritance yet?" I felt my heart tighten. "How do you know?" His expression grew serious. "Because your mother anticipated it. In fact, she was so certain he would try to claim your inheritance that she took very specific legal steps to make sure that never happened." "I don't understand." "Your mother left everything to you, Shanice. The house, valued at around $400,000. Her savings and investment accounts, totaling approximately $1.3 million. Her life insurance policy, another $500,000. The total estimated value of the estate is about $1.73 million. The number stunned me. I knew my mother was careful with money, always lived modestly, and invested wisely, but I had no idea she had accumulated that much. "But Derek said it's marital property," I whispered. "He said we have to split it." Attorney Jackson's smile told me he knew something Derek didn't. "That is exactly what your mother anticipated. But 6 months ago, she established something called an inheritance protection trust. Every dollar she left you is held in that trust, and under its specific terms, those assets belong to you and only you. They can never be considered marital property. They are fully protected from any divorce proceedings." I sucked in a breath. My mother knew. My mother knew he would do this. "She never said anything directly negative about Derek," Attorney Jackson said carefully. "But about a year ago, she came to ask about protecting an inheritance in the event of a divorce. She said she had a feeling and wanted to make sure that if anything happened to her." He paused, then pulled out another file from beneath the desk, looking like an investigative report with photographs and written statements. "And that's not all. Your mother went further. About a month ago, she hired a private investigator, an old friend of mine, to follow Derek. She wanted to be sure. Sadly, she passed away before receiving the full report, but I continued the investigation and completed it according to her wishes." My heart pounded. "What did you find?" Attorney Jackson slid the file toward me, his voice low. "Derek had been planning the divorce for at least 4 months, coinciding with the time your mother was diagnosed with cancer. He met with his own lawyer, discussed asset division, and quietly moved money from your joint accounts into an account in his own name, using business expenses and short-term investments. The amounts weren't large enough to draw immediate attention, but they were sufficient to create a personal safety net for himself." I swallowed hard. I had never checked those numbers. I had been at the hospital. I had been at my mother's bedside. "But that's not all." He laid out the photographs, blurry but unmistakable images taken from a distance. Derek and a young blonde woman entering a hotel on the outskirts of Dallas, his arm around her shoulders. Another photo. They were at an obstetrics clinic, her hand resting on her belly, Derek smiling beside her. The dates on the photos matched the weeks I was with my mother. His mistress's name is Lauren Kelly, a coworker from his sales company. They've been seeing each other for at least 6 months, and from what the investigator gathered, she's pregnant, about 3 months along. Derek even promised her a new life after he handled the inheritance. I stared at the photos, tears spilling uncontrollably. Not just greed, but betrayal. Building another family while I was fighting my mother's death. Everything made sense now. The late-night calls, the irritation when I stayed with my mother, the complaints that I was neglecting him. It was all a cover for this betrayal. My tears poured down. "So he can't touch my mother's assets? Not a single cent? Not a penny. This trust is rock solid. I personally made sure of that." He pulled out another document from the file. There's one more thing. Your mother left you a letter. She asked me to give it to you after I explained the trust. He handed me an envelope with my name written in my mother's familiar handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. My dear Shanice, if you are reading these words, then I'm gone, and I suspect Derek has shown his true face. My love, I am so sorry you had to learn this way, but I noticed the change in him many years ago. The way he looked at money, talked about wealth, seemed more interested in what someone could provide than in who they were. I never said anything because I hoped I was wrong, hoped he would prove me wrong, hoped love would make him better. Over the past year, I devoted all my time to making sure every dollar I earned would be for you and you alone. Not to control you from the other side, but to give you freedom. Freedom to leave if you need to. Freedom to start over if you want to. Freedom to build the life you deserve. The money in that trust is yours. Use it wisely. And my love, you are strong, you are smart, and you deserve to be truly loved. Stand firm. I am always with you. All my love, Mom. I couldn't stop crying. Attorney Jackson quietly handed me tissues and gave me time to compose myself. There's one more thing, he said gently. She even set aside $50,000 specifically to cover legal fees if needed. If Derek filed for divorce within a year of her passing, she thought of everything. I looked up at him through my tears. What do I do now? Now? He leaned back in his chair. Now we let Derek think he's winning. Let him believe you'll split everything evenly. And when he's comfortable, when he's completely certain he's about to walk away with nearly $1 million, that's when we show him exactly what Gloria Patterson did to protect her daughter. For the first time since my mother died, I felt something other than overwhelming pain. I felt hope, and deep inside, I felt the first stirrings of something else. Justice. The next 2 weeks were among the hardest periods of my life. I had to pretend with Derek, had to let him believe his plan was working while I documented every conversation, every demand, every manipulative move. Attorney Jackson had been clear. Let him show his true face. Let him fully reveal his intentions. We'll need evidence for the judge. Derek moved back into the house, into the living room, he said, just until everything was settled. Every day he asked about the inheritance, when the probate process would be finished, and how soon we could get the money. My lawyer says we should sell your mother's house immediately, he declared one evening. Liquidate it so we can split it properly. My mother's house, the house where I grew up, where she took her last breath. And he wanted to sell it as if it were just another asset on a spreadsheet. My best friend, Tiana, came by almost every day. She could see what was happening, and it made her furious. Girl, I don't know how you're staying so calm, she said one afternoon, as we sat in my mother's kitchen, sorting through her things. If it were me, I'd have killed him. I'm not calm, I'm just waiting. For what? I wanted to tell her about his betrayal, about the trust, about my mother's plan, but Attorney Jackson advised keeping it quiet. Just wait for the right moment. What I didn't tell her was that I was documenting everything. Derek's demands. The way he calculated how much each of us would get. The way he started treating the house as if it already belonged to him, making decisions without consulting me, talking about his share of everything, continuing to betray the marriage while blaming its collapse on me. The final confrontation took place at the settlement meeting. Derek and his expensive divorce attorney sat across from us in Attorney Jackson's conference room, both looking confident and pleased with themselves. Let's discuss the division of assets, Derek's lawyer began. My client has documentation showing that Mrs. Harrison's mother's estate is valued at approximately $1.7 million. Since this inheritance was received during the marriage, we are requesting an equal division. Stop right there, Attorney Jackson interrupted. He slid a document across the table. This is the Inheritance Protection Trust established by Gloria Patterson 6 months before her death. All assets she left to her daughter are held in this trust, and it explicitly excludes any spousal claims. I watched Derek's face as his lawyer read the document, saw the confidence drain away and be replaced by shock. "This can't be legal," Derek stammered. "We're married." "It is completely legal," Attorney Jackson said calmly. Mrs. Patterson also left a video recording explaining her intentions. "Would you like to see it?" He turned the laptop so all of us could see the screen. My mother's face appeared, thinner than I remembered, but with eyes that were sharp and resolute. "If you're watching this, then Derek has done exactly what I feared." I want to state clearly that my daughter, Shanice, devoted herself to caring for me, while my son-in-law visited only about once a month. She gave up everything to be by my side. This inheritance belongs entirely to her, built through love and sacrifice. The video ended. The room was silent. "You scheming—" Derek stood up, his face twisted with rage. "Sit down, Mr. Harrison," his lawyer snapped. He looked at Attorney Jackson. "We need time to review." "Take all the time you need. This trust is ironclad. Your client has no legal claim to it whatsoever." After that day, I barely spoke to Derek anymore. Not because I was angry, but because I was too tired to argue. I left everything else to the lawyers and spent most of my time in my mother's old room, sorting through her things or simply sitting in silence. Derek wasn't used to that. He was used to me explaining, used to me reassuring him, used to me coming back whenever he apologized. But this time, I didn't. And my silence infuriated him more than any criticism ever could. I could feel his restlessness through the apologetic messages, the attempts to patch things up. Derek began to panic. He was used to a Shanice who was vulnerable, easy to persuade, easy to reduce to tears and pleas. Now, I was like a wall of ice. I knew he was afraid. And when a manipulator feels control slipping away, he will try to take it back, at any cost. A few days later, his retaliation came. I woke up one morning to dozens of messages from friends and church members. When I opened Facebook, I saw that Derek had written a long post portraying himself as the victim. "I need to share my truth. My wife has emotionally abused me for years, controlled our finances, and isolated me from friends and family. Now, after her mother passed away and left a large inheritance, she's trying to completely cut me out of her life. I supported her throughout her mother's illness, and this is how she repays me. I'm not asking for sympathy, just understanding that every story has two sides." The comments were divided, with some people supporting Derek and others questioning me. Strangers called me greedy, heartless, money-hungry, within my own marriage, and even when it came to inheriting from my own mother. I called Attorney Jackson immediately, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. "He's lying about me online. People believe him." "Do nothing," he said firmly. "Don't respond. Don't engage. This is manipulation, Shanice. He's controlling the narrative. But social media doesn't matter in court. The truth matters. The evidence matters. And we have all the evidence we need." 3 days later, I came home from school and found my front door wide open. I stood on the porch, my heart pounding, and called 911 with trembling hands. The police found my house completely trashed. The sofa cushions were slashed, dishes shattered, clothes in the closet ripped to pieces. On the refrigerator, the words, "greedy bitch," were spray painted in red. On my bedroom mirror, "You'll pay for this." Worse than that, my mother's pearl necklace, the one she wore on her wedding day, the one she promised to give me, had been smashed into pieces across the floor. I couldn't stay there. Tiana took me to her house, and I called Attorney Jackson from her living room. He vandalized my house. He smashed my mother's pearls. He spray-painted threats. "Did you call the police?" "Yes. They made a report. They're looking for him." "Good. Shanice, I know this sounds terrible, but this actually helps our case. Derek just showed everyone exactly who he is. No judge will see this and still have any doubts about his character." The police found Derek at his brother's house and arrested him on charges of unlawful entry, vandalism, and making terroristic threats. His bail hearing was scheduled for the following day. I attended with Attorney Jackson. When they led Derek into the courtroom in an orange jail uniform and handcuffs, he actually had the nerve to smile at me, as if we were still husband and wife, as if he hadn't broken into my home and destroyed the irreplaceable things my mother left behind. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my voice steady. Your Honor, I was married to this man for 10 years. I loved him. I trusted him. But he cheated on me. 2 days after my mother's funeral, he filed for divorce. When he realized he would not receive the inheritance he believed he was entitled to, he showed me who he really was. He posted lies about me online. He broke into my home and destroyed everything. He smashed my late mother's jewelry. Things that can never be replaced. I looked directly at Derek. He wanted me to be afraid. But what he didn't understand is that my mother prepared me for this. She saw through him years ago and made sure I would be protected. The judge set his bail at $50,000 and issued a restraining order against him. Derek was required to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. The divorce was finalized exactly 4 months after my mother's death, much faster than most contested cases, thanks to the mountain of evidence we had carefully prepared. At the final hearing, I sat up straight and met Derek's eyes without a trace of trembling. The judge reviewed everything: my mother's ironclad trust, the investigative reports detailing the affair and asset diversion, recordings of Derek saying he deserved more, the defamatory social media posts, and the police report from the vandalism. He was ordered to pay full restitution for all damages, from repairing the house to compensating for my mother's irreplaceable pearl necklace, plus the $20,000 he had secretly withdrawn from our joint account to support Lauren. Derek walked away with nothing, not a single cent of the inheritance, and even in debt. But his downfall didn't stop in the courtroom. Derek's commission-based sales job had been unstable for a long time. After the arrest and local news coverage of the vandalism and restraining order, his reputation collapsed. The company fired him immediately. No one wanted an employee accused of making terroristic threats representing their brand. He was unemployed, his resume permanently stained, and every interview that followed ended the moment employers Googled his name. Lauren, once she realized there was no big money coming to build the new life he had promised, quickly turned her back on him as well. She kept the baby, but cut all ties with him just weeks after the trial. I heard it through a mutual contact at the company. Lauren said she didn't want her child growing up around a man who was all calculation and failure. Derek now lives alone in a cheap rental apartment, buried in debt, with no stable job and no new family like the one he imagined. As for me, on the day I signed the final divorce papers, I set down the pen without a single tear of regret. I felt lighter, as if a 10-year weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Derek thought he could use my grief to steal the future my mother had spent her life building, but he lost. To my mother, to his own greed and betrayal, and ultimately to the life he destroyed with his own hands. Just as my mother intended, not a single dollar of hers ended up in the hands of someone unworthy. 1 year later, I sat in my mother's garden, now my garden, planting the roses she had always wanted. The house was mine. The money had given me a freedom I'd never imagined, and I had gone back to school to earn a master's degree in education, something my mother had always encouraged. I had also established a scholarship fund in her name, helping students in our community go to college, just as she had worked multiple jobs to support me. At the first scholarship ceremony, I stood before the church community and shared my story. My mother taught me that true love is protective, I said. It doesn't control or manipulate. It doesn't come with conditions. It simply protects. When you have that kind of love in your life, when you know someone loves you enough to think about your future, even when they know they won't be there to see it, that's enough. 2 years after my mother passed, I was finally truly happy. Not the fake happiness I performed with Derek, but real joy. The kind that comes from knowing yourself, from freedom, from living honestly. Sometimes people ask if I'm dating again. I smile and tell them the truth. I'm not searching, but I'm not running either. If real love comes, it will come. And if it doesn't, I'm completely content with my single life. Because that is what my mother's gift truly gave me, not just financial security, but freedom. Freedom to choose my own path. Freedom to say no to anything that doesn't serve me. Freedom to wait for real love instead of settling for a false one. Freedom to be happy in my own way. On the first anniversary of my mother's death, I visited her grave with flowers and read aloud the letter I had written. Dear Mom, it's been 3 years, and I want you to know that I'm okay. Actually, I'm not just okay. I'm more than okay. I'm truly happy. I continued through tears. Thank you for everything you sacrificed. Thank you for loving me enough to see the dangers I couldn't. Thank you for protecting me one last time. I'm living, truly living, just as you told me to. I sat by her grave as the sun set, feeling her presence, her love, and her pride. For the first time since she passed, I felt completely at peace. Because my mother gave me the greatest gift a parent can give: wisdom, protection, freedom, and unconditional love that transcends death. Derek thought he'd hit the jackpot when my mother died. But what he never understood was that my mother was always one step ahead. She knew exactly who he was, and she made sure he would never benefit from the love she had for me. And now, every day, I live with gratitude for having been loved that way. My mother's love didn't end when she died. It simply transformed into protection, into freedom, into the beautiful life I am building now. Some people might say what my mother did was too harsh, but those people have never loved someone enough to protect them from their own blind spots, never cared enough to plan for dangers their loved one couldn't yet see. My mother did, and because of her, I am free, I am strong, I am happy, and finally, I am home.